Chad, there's 5 more seats up here.
My name is Jenna Smith, and this is my colleague, Sheehy. Before we get started and do our additional introductions, we'll just wanted to get a feel for who's here today. So wondering what your background is, how many people here manage low-income multifamily property? Okay, all right. What about consultants? So just really quickly for all, what kind of consultants? Architecture. Okay. All right, and let's see, of the people who manage housing, how many are housing authorities? Couple housing authorities, nonprofits, any for-profit developers? Okay, great. And how many people are actually working on solar projects right now? You're always working.
Would you like to give a presentation now?
Okay, great. Well, so just a little bit about who we are, and you just have to press this button one time. Okay. Am I?
You can just go to the first slide for us. It's stuck on the video, I think. There we go. Now it's working.
Okay, great. So my colleague and I work for Chrisman Development and Fleet Development. Ryan is the president of Fleet Development. Is it better if I talk into this? Okay. So just a little bit about who we are and our background. So I just realized about a quarter of a century of background working in utilities and resource conservation. I started out working for Seattle Public Utilities, where I ran water conservation rebate type programs. I also got to work on some of the other lines of business for the utility. I worked in solid waste and drainage programs. And then you're leaving already? There's some seats up here now. So and after that, I also I worked for about 6 years for King County Housing Authority, managing their sustainability program. And then for the past 3 years, I've been working for Chrisman Development and Fleet Development, continuing my energy efficiency, water conservation type background. Yes.
So she's clearly the expert. My role in this is I work for Fleet Development, this company that I co-founded with the founder of Chrisman Development. And I started as a property manager, actually with Verde Management. So I'm coming since really just 2016, working on property management side into housing development and into the utility space. And there's a lot of space in the utility space and affordable housing. So we're going to give a presentation on what we've learned over the last 5 years of working on this. So I'm going to go to the next slide for me.
I can make it work.
Yeah. You've got our backgrounds here. What we do at Fleet is solve problems for the other companies in our industry group. And we're really trying to leverage our knowledge of the utilities, how to reduce them, reduce the cost, and make that money that's going to utilities be available to other parts of running affordable housing property. And we're sometimes when you save money there, you can actually magnify that resource across the rest of the property. So we're going to share some of the things we've learned. It's not as easy as I thought. Next slide, please. Actually, back up one. There's one other comment I want to make here. In 2016, when I walked in the door at Chrisman Development, the first question the founder of that company asked me was, "What do you know about solar?" And of course, I knew nothing about solar. I wouldn't say I know everything now, but I've learned a lot. And since then, in the intervening 5 years, we built a company that deals with solar and energy efficiency for our properties. And at first, back then, we thought it would be easy. It is not easy. You've probably had other lectures today where they talked about all the money coming down. We're going to touch on that briefly. I wish that there was a way that I could say, hey, there's 1.7 billion in EPA funding coming to multifamily affordable housing. You just need to grab your piece of it and go. It's not that easy. So I think our strategy today will show you what we're doing to overcome some of the barriers. First, I apologize. These slides always look bigger when it's 8 inches from your face. But I don't think the point is lost. The column on the left is the 7 companies in Chrisman Industry Group, starting with the granddaddy Chrisman Development, the property management company Viridian Management, Viridian Consulting, IPA, which is asset management, Fleet Development, our company, 2 construction companies, and Maintenance Training Institute, all working together, vertically integrated. One company solves a problem for another. Those advantages are filtered down through everybody. Everybody's scratching everybody else's back. But it's also horizontally integrated. And that term to me just means we plug all these companies in over the life cycle of a development, from first intake or new construction through a recapitalization event, and then a longer ongoing operations and maintenance. And there's a piece in every part of that for all of these companies. And our company plugs in at least 3 of those places easily. Although on a daily basis, in fact, I'm getting emails right now about some utility issue on a project we're working on for Chrisman Development that I really should be answering instead of giving this lecture, but I'd rather be giving a lecture. So next slide, please. Okay, so I kind of touched on it, but we got a lot going on in Fleet. So we are servicing the utility analysis assessment and hopefully reduction of cost for all of the properties we manage or own. So we're talking about on any given day, so we're in the 155, 160 company properties. We're also doing work for outside developers as well on those subjects. A couple of years ago, I wrote a white paper about we should get involved in community solar because we can hook it to our properties and lower their energy budgets. Fast forward 4 years later, we're working on completion of our second large community solar project. It's kind of a one-off for us, but it is something that we're doing. So we're in like a near utility scale solar development, 20 acres on one end, rooftop on the other end, in between all the sustainability and energy efficiency issues at our properties and how it all works in the larger landscape. On top of that, if there's one person you didn't ask about in your opener was finance folks. If there's any of those in the room, I know there's at least one in here. The tax credit and financing strategies for solar is just, it's complicated. It's really powerful. And there's a bunch of new stuff with the Inflation Reduction Act that's even more complicated. I've made it through 180 pages of rules that came down with the Inflation Reduction Act. Marked it all up, forgot to hit save, so I got to go back through again and do that. But it's a lot, and it's coming. It's not quite here yet, but the bow wave is here, and hopefully we can help you adapt to that. But the biggest thing really has been barrier removal. So you can't just go put solar on one of these properties. There's all kinds of issues and hoops you got to jump through to do it. You have to figure out how to actually make that work to offset the whole property's usage. You have to get agency approval sometimes. Sometimes you have to get investor approval. I have one solar project that took me 4 years and a $10,000 legal bill to actually get permission to put solar on. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's where it is with affordable housing. You know, we don't do anything in this business without making it complicated, because that's our number one mission. So despite all that, over the last 5 years, we have completed about 5.6 megawatts, which is maybe a number that's relevant to people in the room or not. I'm not sure, but it's a lot. It's a lot for us. It's about 15.5 million in total project costs installed on our properties. That generated 4.6 million in tax credits, and we captured about 3.36 million in incentives. And while I don't have it on the slide, for the one finance person in the room, that's also 9 million in write-offs. So that's another thing. And if you add all that up, it's more than 15 million. And that's because that's how this works. You can actually cobble together a lot of resources. And in a few cases, you can actually make solar pay for itself. Next slide.
So most of these projects are on our renovated properties versus new construction.
That's true. Yep. Mostly what we do in the whole industry group is preservation and rehab. So that's mainly what we're working with. We also do some new construction. It is quite a bit easier on new construction. But next slide, please. So why do we do it? I think this room is way more packed than we thought. So I'm assuming that everyone else understands why we're doing it. The increase in utilities this year, if you haven't noticed, in Oregon, this slide is actually a California slide. I couldn't find one on Oregon, but it's 20%. And you probably read the Oregon Live news story January 1st about the rate increases PAC and PGE. I think they listed 7.6%. It's 20%. If you added up the month by month increases this year and all the ancillary fees that go up, it's 20%. It's about 17.6 for residential meters and 20.3 for commercial meters. PG is similar. The co-ops in Oregon, not quite going up like that, but they will in time. And then the reason the California slide is important, some of you probably have properties in California, but 30% is the average. Some utilities went up 63% in California in the last year. So if you haven't noticed that yet, it's because you haven't looked at your annualized budget over 2023 yet. But you'll see when your budget comes in for end of year actuals that there was a huge jump in utilities. So that's one reason. But it's really triple win on the bottom line. There's benefits for the tenants, and there's also benefits for the environment. And when I think about the new building code in Oregon, it's pretty good. It's pretty energy efficient. The only issue with it is it only affects properties from now going forward. So 99.9% of everything Oregon's already built. And we need to go fix that. So that's what we're doing. And those three things together are compelling reasons to do it. I'll get into some of the tenant benefits a little bit later. But also, finally, HUD and some of the bigger controlling agencies here are pushing us in this direction, particularly on assessing how much you're spending on energy and tracking it. That's going to be something that's coming in the future. So we're just getting in front of it.
Let me just ask a quick question. How many people are tracking their utilities in something like Portfolio Manager, where you're actually tracking the consumption versus just cost? Anybody? Yeah, because it's complicated.
Yeah,
it's hard to do.
It is hard to do. But the bottom line is, if I would imagine most of the properties in here and under your management are the tenants are paying the utilities. That's like what 99% of it is. And so in some ways, as owners or managers, you're not really thinking about the cost of energy because someone else is paying it. But is that true? I mean, if energy costs go up within a year, your utility allowance goes up, which means the rent went down. And while it's all net zero to the tenant, the problem is that's less money in the property's budget for you to do things like deferred maintenance, pay your staff a comparable living wage, all those other issues, and eventually you lose control. I mean, there's a couple of things you can't really stop: utility increases and tax increases. And we're saying, well, maybe there is something you can do to control the utilities, and it matters. It's not just the tenants paying it; it's you ultimately. Next slide. So where we were a couple of years ago when I first started, and before I realized there was a lot of barriers. These are some of the quotes that I've received from the people that I had to ask permission to put solar on. Not standard. I can't approve that at my level. This is a state director telling me, not Oregon, by the way. If there's anybody from Oregon Housing, it's not from Oregon, it's from another state. Told me that the state director could not approve a rooftop solar project without getting permission from Washington, D.C. Is this the environment that's going to get 1.7 billion of EPA's money spent on affordable housing solar? No, it's not. It needs to change. Another state architect told me that if we were to put solar on because it touches electricity, it would be considered a substantial rehab, and therefore a whole bunch of other oversight and supervision that's really unnecessary for something that's had standardized building codes for 15 to 20 years. And then my favorite one, while we're not specifically opposed to solar, our agency frankly interest or support for it. Thank you. At least you're transparent. Really, no interest in utility costs. Go to the next slide, please. It's a big deal. It's $7.6 billion that HUD spends on energy every year. The average utility allowance is $109 per unit, which is about $52,000 on a 40-unit property, and is growing. It's the fastest growing part of HUD's budget. So I think they recognize that now, and just seeing the money flow down. 837 million, just pull some stats. You probably heard these earlier today, but in grants, 4 billion in loan authority from HUD alone. The EPA Solar for All program, which is formulaic funding for states to capture 1.7 billion. I mean, these are crazy numbers, like generational type numbers. Oregon's going to apply for 120 million of it. They're talking about incentives in the range of many thousands per unit to put solar and other energy efficiency things on. So it's definitely coming, but it's not going to be that easy. And I'll get into that a little bit. The budget is really where the rubber meets the road. And I just want to prepare everybody for, and maybe get some ideas too. So if someone's like, Frank, you missed this one thing that would have made your last 5 years less miserable. So put that out for me. All right. So the split incentive problem. Who, just show of hands, who here has heard of the split incentive problem that's been lauded in academic papers since the 80s when we first decided that tenants were going to pay for the electricity? Yes, it's a big deal. This is written about in academic circles. It is the number one reason there's not solar on all of these properties. Because why wouldn't you attack your biggest rising cost and control it for the future in 30-year chunks? You put a solar project on, you just levelize your cost of energy for the next 30 years. It's because you have no incentive. And when I say you, I'm talking about owners and managers, but really the environment has no incentive. If the tenants are paying the energy bills and you're not really thinking it all the way through, then you don't have an incentive and you really don't have a way to put solar on. Because really you can only offset the meter that you control as the manager. And the tenants, they don't really have, if you were to take over their power bill, they don't really have an incentive to conserve energy, which is like the number one I'm finding is the boogeyman under the bed for developers and managers of properties is the tenants are going to use too much energy, it's going to ruin their property budget. And I disagree, but that is a fear that's out there. And so, you know, the status quo is tenants pay for utilities. That helps provide a natural incentive to conserve, but it also means that we have no incentive to put solar on. So this is really blocked everything for, it's been a problem since the 80s, but it's now a real problem that everyone's tackling because all this money is coming down to put solar on, but there's no incentive. And even though grabbing free money is an incentive in its own way, it's still not possible because of the utility allowance problem. And, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, I would ask HUD and USDA to totally revamp the UA system, but that's not going to happen. So we're just going to work with what we have and we're going to deal with this problem. And this is how we're tackling this. Okay, so if it's post-launch and if you're about to doze off, just let me hit you with these key takeaways real quick. This is what we're going to talk about. Embrace project-paid utilities. And I'm expecting to hear a gasp in the crowd because it's probably an uncommon counterintuitive thing. Aim for size your projects for 80% of your total usage. We'll talk about that in a second. Don't think of solar as a solar project. Think of it as the biggest financing tool you have. Know your tax credit geography, know your utility regulations in your area where your properties are, and the energy efficiency measures and incentive programs. That's the main thing. And the most main thing is the top bullet. That's how you're going to be able to really make a difference here. Thanks. So the paradigm shift that we went through as a company about 3 years ago in July, we had a company meeting. I gave a presentation similar to this on why, as a company, we needed to switch over to project-paid utilities. And that term just means that you, as a property manager, you're paying the bill for everybody. You're taking all that cost and bringing it to you, and there's a reason for that. So why would you do that? Well, you spend more on tenant-paid utilities than you think. So if you're only thinking of it as the UA and that lost rent revenue, that discount off your rent, that's a significant portion of what you're losing. But there's more to it than that. Every year you have to do utility, let me get this right, utility allowance analysis. Try to say that fast. Or you have to pay Zephyr or somebody to do it. So there's a cost right there. When a tenant moves out unexpectedly and the power gets shut off, and the power company charges you $60 to shut the power off, and then a tenant moves in and they charge you $60 or charge someone $60 to turn back on, that's a cost. When a tenant moves out and they got a refund from the utility for $4.80, and your accountants spend the next 4 years tracking that down to get them to cash that check as is legally required by law, or get it submitted to the Lost Check Bureau of Oregon agency, whatever, how much money does that cost? So you can probably afford a little bit of tenant increased energy use and not go broke. In fact, you're probably better off than you were before. When a senior property has tenant paid utilities, it's not uncommon to go into a unit and find your grandmother under an Afghan quilt with the thermostat turned all the way off and mold growing in the walls because of the humidity that's building up in there. That has a cost. And this one, I don't know if it's fair to say, but it happened to us. So we had a tenant not pay their bill, power got shut off. The stove became a horizontal stacking surface. And then the utility turned the power back on and it burned that unit down. So, because the stove was still on from when the power went out. So that's an extreme case, but that is a case that is still costing us on insurance. And I think, it's not anyone's fault. It's just the way the system is. And those are the things that you're paying for that you don't even realize. Burst pipes, yes. Tenant moves out in the winter in the green, and you're almost guaranteed in that corner you to have a burst pipe within a month. So I would add, we've taken a holistic look at it, and we've assessed that the tenants could spend a lot more on energy or use a lot more energy, and we're still ahead by not having to deal with that. And then every day the accountants in our office thank me for not having to do all the shenanigans on those properties that we switched over. The other thing is when you do take over the utilities and you offset it with solar and energy efficiency, you have planked that cost of energy for that property. Whatever, if it's a 50% offset project, then 50% of your bill is not going to raise for 30 years. Solar panels are warranted for performance for 30 plus years. So if you do 100% offset, which is hard to do, but is possible, you're not going to have an increase in your power cost for 30 years. Now, how crazy is that? Like when I do a pro forma on these projects, I show the value, what it's going to earn in tax credits and in savings and all that. We assume a 2.5% increase over time to give the owner an idea that maybe over 20 years, they'll save 100,000, 200,000, whatever. But, with a 20% jump this year, I mean, it's already like eating up our first 8 years of projections all came in 1 year. So it's almost hard to even communicate how much money you could save. And then there's benefits for the tenants as well. And, when the tenant no longer pays electricity, the rent goes up by an equal amount. It's a net neutral thing to the tenant. And, but, at least in Oregon, maybe this isn't quite as true in Phoenix, Arizona, but in Oregon, our tenants' power bills in the winter are triple what they are in the summer, at least triple. So if you're on a fixed income, how painful is that February 1st power bill compared to the July power bill? Your income is not doing that. It's flat. So in some ways, actually just shedding the tenant's electricity bill and having them pay a fixed rent is a much more fair thing for the tenants as well. The other big thing with that is, in my opinion, is our tenants, one of their biggest fears is missing the payment on the utility bill and having it shut off. That anxiety is gone. And they can keep the unit at the proper temperature. And since we're putting in heat pumps as well, then it's cooler in the summer and it's warmer in the winter. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a little thought experiment. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but that's what I came up with. So this is an actual property in LaGrange, Oregon, Cove Avenue. Shelly's probably going to correct me, but I think it's 24 units, RD property. This one I actually retrofit solar onto because I had a newer roof. I don't recommend retrofitting. It's easier to just do it during a preservation recapitalization event. But anyway, if you imagine that this is your property and just with your current billing electricity situation at your property, you're going to put on the maximum solar that you can put on. which is, yeah, I know you probably can't see in the back, but there's a tiny little solar project on the, use my finger, the laundry building. That's all you can do. That's the only meter you control. And the way solar works, you can only put it on the meters that you control. I mean, you can put it on the tenants, but then the tenant's power bill would go to zero. And who's actually paying for that solar? One of the big ways you finance solar is actually getting a reduced cost, which gives you cash flow at the property to pay a loan or whatever. So if you take that financing leg of the stool, it collapses. So you can't do that. You can only put it on the ones where you have the finances to actually pay for the solar. So that's the bill at this property is $19,248, and that's what the tenants are paying electricity. And that you see that at your property management desk as the utility allowance or a discount rent, and that's all getting paid to the utilities. Next. Your tiny little solar project, your first effort, it's noble, but it's tiny. It's 7% of the project, 16 kilowatts. You're going to save $1,800 a year. That's great for the property manager and that one portion of the bill, but it's really insignificant in the big scheme, and certainly insignificant in controlling costs at your property. Next. And next slide. Okay, so fast forward, putting solar on. Now, at this point, at Cove Avenue, or your imaginary property that you've got in your head that you want to try this on, we took over the tenant power bills, and once all those meters were on our account, now we can net meter against all of those. And every utility has a different way of doing that, but there is a way in every utility. So we able to put out a much bigger project. I think it was around 125 kilowatts. And go ahead. So now that $19,248 in utility allowance that went to the utility is now coming to the property manager, where you can use it in your budget. And then there's $12,000 per year in savings. 6 of that is just from solar generation alone. I'll get into where the other 6 came from in a minute. But this project, we're saving $12,000 a year just by taking over the tenant's utilities. Next. The resulting power bill after that to the utilities, we're paying $7,100 a year on average. What if the tenants use more energy? I know that's the burning question in everyone's mind. That's the one thing that I had to work to overcome disbelief in our organization as well. They really use more energy. Absolutely. If they don't have to pay for it anymore, it makes sense. You would too. But at the rate that we have in LaGrange, Oregon, and this is going to be close to true for every utility in Oregon, if there's a 3% increase, that's an extra $526 on your utility bill. You just saved $12,000. Do you really care if they use $500 more energy? No. In fact, I would say, for reasons like I mentioned earlier, it's better if they're using the temperature thermostat correctly, and it's better for the property. At 10% increase would only be $1,700. You would have to go up, you would have to have a 37% jump in tenant usage to equal just the solar savings at this property. And they don't all work out this way, but this is one example. Where's that other $6,000 in savings coming from? Are there any utility people? We master meter the property. And this is Oregon Trail Electric Co. The meter fees are $33.50 per tenant meter, which is crazy. The mansion next door, and there's no mansions in LaGrange, but if there was, also $33.50 per meter. But this poor tenant's paying that full thing. So when we master metered, we wiped out almost all the meters of the property. That's your other $6,000 savings. And that is one of our proprietary tricks. So sharing it with you here only. Yeah. Okay, 80% sizing. What does that really mean? So what we do, Jenna and I do when we're looking at one of these projects, is we figure out how much energy is being burned at this property. And there's probably people from Earth Advantage in here who calculate this for a living. We figure that out as well. And then we look at, if we put energy efficiency on, how much can we reduce it? And then where is the total we think it's going to be afterwards? We're going to size the solar project to only offset 80%. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If you go over 80% and you have like a 10% vacancy rate or something like that, then you might actually be generating more energy than you're using. So we want to be just under, you've wasted money at that point. Not all utilities have a net metering scheme that lets you bank credits for the future. So that's something you just got to, it kind of goes back to that takeaway about knowing the utility area you're in and the rules. We just 80% works. There's a couple of cases. We'll have one at the end here where we did more than that. We actually did 105%, but that was a special case. For efficiency, for the best bang for your buck, 80%. You're gonna have a little bit of a power bill most of the time, except in the summer, and it just works out. Anything else, you're throwing money away. How do you figure out what your usage is? Well, once you've taken over the tenants accounts for the big ways like PG and PAC, you can go right online and download it all. But you also have your utility allowance analysis that you've done. You can reverse engineer your usage out of that. It's not quite as accurate, but it's a quick way to figure it out. And then you can also hire someone. It's an allowable expense at most of these properties. So, and I recommend knowing what you're burning so you can build a strategy for actually tackling it.
I think that last point's really important to cover just really quickly. Did you know that you can actually hire an energy consultant to go in and do an audit and pay for it at the property level? So I think that's just good to know.
Yep, it costs somewhere, probably depending on what you're doing, anywhere between $1,000 to $3,000, but it's probably worth it in the long run. Especially if it's always going to be the first step to doing a project, especially big one where you're looking at a total offset. Next. Okay, financing tools. I promise Jenna's going to talk here in a second, but I'm like a stuffed parrot with a cord or whatever once I get going. So do not think of a solar project as a solar project. This is a finance machine. It will make your deals much sweeter. It'll provide more money for scope of work for other things. It can leverage its impact is outsized to just saving energy. So we did a project, Spring Garden Apartments, in 2022, 3 sites. And one of the sites alone was 320 kilowatts and then 48 kilowatt. And I think the other one was in the 200 range. Bottom line, pretty big project over the whole property. One of the properties has like a 90% offset and the other one had 71% energy offset. But at the end of the day, the solar project cost was 10% of the whole construction budget. That is not insignificant. And why is that important? No one's here to like, how can we spend more on construction projects? Obviously, but that 10% is generating double credits. So that helps you pay for other things. So if you're calculating the eligible basis for, and this is $1 million solar project. So now you just earned $1 million in LIHTC credits and $1 million in Section 48 solar credits, or not $1 million, but you've had the eligible basis for that. So, whatever it was, 300,000-400,000 for a solar project in credits. Also, the Inflation Reduction Act got rid of the deduction and LIHTC basis, so it's pure now. That's amazing, really. It's probably the only thing in the tax code that lets you double dip like that. I probably should never have said that in a room full of experts, but it's the only thing I know about, and that's true. So what we've done, our finance leads kind of figured this out. They started looking at it and I said, well, how much is this actually saving the property? Well, in this case, it's about $45,000 a year out of the energy budget for that 3-site property. So with $45,000, you can borrow more from your 538 lender or whoever your bank is willing to lend more because you can prove you've got the cash flow to cover it. If you look at where your property is, the standard solar 30% tax credit, which has been restored to 30% last year, might actually be 40% or even 50%. Depends on what things that apply to it. There's some boosted credits out there, and some of that's a little bit murky. And I know you already had another lecture on it, so I won't go into it. But utility costs are locked in this property for 30 years, so that's not something we have to put a lot of inflation to in our budget. And there's a lot of local and state incentives that came with that. So Oregon Department of Energy kicked in. They'll give up to $30,000 per meter for solar, which is a tremendous. I mean, we're talking $100,000 to $200,000 in incentives just from that one incentive alone. Energy Trust kicked in another $45,000 for this project. It just started accessing all of these grants and incentives that Oregon's pretty good about and are about to get a lot deeper pockets. And then finally, if you do master metering, you're going to get some savings there in most cases. So this particular project I'm talking about, we didn't, but that's a tool as well. Next. Just real quick, some of the stuff is a little easier to figure out. So the map on the right is the 10% low income community booster credit. It's as simple as just figuring out if you're in the right green area on the map. There's a website on, I don't remember the link now, but what else, characters, URL. There's no way I'm going to remember that for this presentation, but it's out there. And for those who are familiar with New Market Tax Credit Program, it's the same map. They've just added in a few extra areas as well. But I know you can't see in the back, but you can stack credits on some of these projects. If you bought an American-made solar panel in the area, a low-income community project, all these other things, you can conceivably get 70% credit, which is just mind-blowing. That's you wouldn't even know what to do with all that money. Next, please. I don't know if you wanted to talk to this anymore. Yeah,
You getting tired of talking?
yes. They're tired of it.
Well, I just briefly want to talk a little bit about utilities. There are about just over 40 electric utilities in Oregon alone. So they all have different rate structures. They all have different regulations, metering requirements. But actually a theme for this whole presentation is where there's a will, there's a way, because there is always a path for finding a solution to install a large amount of solar on one of these low-income multifamily properties. Let's see, anything else about utilities you wanted to say?
I would just add that for maybe many of you just talking about master metering might be a new subject. Oregon approves it and allows it. You may find resistance to that in some utilities. Usually you can wear them down, but every utility has specific concerns or rules about that type of stuff. And one of the biggest ones is net meter aggregation. That's how you pull all the tenants' meters under your bill and then allow solar credits to trickle down. Like not every utility does that. So that's okay. There's a way around that too, but it's why it's not easy to do this. All the stuff we're talking about is time consuming and hard, but there is a way, and that's just got to find the right tool or siege weapon, as I put on there, from storming the castle.
Okay, so of course, our strategy is to first step in and try to do as many energy efficiency upgrades as we can. That's got to be step one. The smaller the energy footload, the smaller the solar system needs to be. So there's some cost savings there as well. And I mean, right now, I think it's pretty straightforward or somewhat straightforward about the types of energy efficiency improvements that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck. And we have Energy Star certified appliances. So we have some information about those types of energy saving measures, but we also have all the incentive programs. I think you heard this morning, there's a couple of the big programs. There's Energy Trust of Oregon and OHCS's ORMET program. So both those programs tell you a lot about the measures that are going to really help reduce your, your energy footprint. But there's also a whole bunch of other little utilities around the state. And if you reach out to them and talk to them a little bit about what you're doing, you may find that they have some money for you for energy efficiency improvements. So what I'll do normally is try to reach out as soon as I can, see what they've got. Sometimes you go to their websites and they only have rebates for residential or commercial. But normally, if you call them up and say, "Hey, we've got a multifamily building, would you provide the same rebate for a residential property for a multi-family property?" Usually they're willing to work with you. So I just say, reach out to them, see if they have some opportunities for you, and you might be surprised. And then I think you heard recently about the green and resiliency. And what's the other word? Green and RR. Retrofit resiliency rebates. No, that's not it. But there's a lot of information coming out about those too. And we talked a little bit about that this morning, and there was a really good presentation on it. So, and then there's some case studies.
So one of the tenant benefits of energy efficiency that maybe doesn't jump out at you right away. Obviously, a heat pump is going to lower the cost, but it's also providing cooling in the summer, which is one of the benefits. But where we live in Enterprise, Oregon, or anybody from the Grants Pass area, it's getting to the point here in the state where the windows need to be closed all summer long. And so we're thinking about the heat pumps, not just for energy savings. That's a nice financing tool or way to make it happen, but also just the fact that it makes quality of life a lot better. So it's one thing that just the way we're thinking about it, it's all holistic, and it's not just about the almighty dollar. Okay, 3 case studies. 2 of these are outside developers. So if there's anybody from CDP in the room, or I guess the other guy's a freelance guy. So anyway, I'm gonna use our work for you to demonstrate some projects that we did and some of the benefits. So the first one's 10 rows in the Grand. This is gonna be an awesome property. It actually looks like a really cool, modern place. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with it, but we're happy to be part of this project. They were struggling with a lot of the metering issues on this property, reached out to us, and we helped them work through a solution. So this property was modeled to have a budget of about $83,000 a year in utility costs. One of their goals, this is maybe not an economically viable goal on just pure dollar signs, but they wanted to be a net zero property. So they wanted the property to generate as much energy as it needed. And that was a goal that kind of went outside of just even the modeling and the costs and the budget. We figured that with the energy efficiency work that they did and went beyond heat pumps, they actually designed in passive solar heating and a bunch of really like LEED platinum level stuff into this building that reduced its energy usage. And then of course all energy efficient equipment, and it's not just heat pumps, we're talking about heat pump water heaters, all that kind of stuff, into reducing consumption. And then we had to put a solar project that would offset the rest. So we designed that. It worked out to about $38,000 in savings. We are covering every square inch of the roof of this property, including, and this will be blasphemy for any of the solar installers there, north-facing solar panels facing away from the sun. Turns out in the summer, they actually produce a lot of energy too, just less so in the winter as the sun dips below the horizon. But to meet their goals, we did this. So Energy Trust, is there anybody from Energy Trust in the room? I want to explain. So Energy Trust has this thing called a TSRF. They want your projects to have a certain efficiency in their production. So all of our incentives from Energy Trust are based off the portions of the project that meet that. But all these other north facing, we just need real estate to hit the additional goal that this property needed. So we went to the north side. But anyway, every square inch, the actual utility bill now after the solar savings and the master metering is $19,000 a year, and that's just purely the remaining meters are on there. This property generates probably 5 to 7% more in solar generation than it consumes in a year. So it's actually giving energy back to the grid at certainly certain parts of the year. The rates, the meter fees can go up there, but there's less of them than there would have been before. So the property's protected there. And also the solar's offsetting everything else through the net metering. So I think that property is in great shape for the next 30 years. And that's $63,000 that goes back in the budget for the property to work with and stay solvent until its next recapitalization event. Next slide. Huntington Apartments in La Pine. This has not been built yet, so this is speculation. But you can't see one of the lines, darn it. Regardless, we mapped out its probable consumption. Actually, is Eric Foley here from Earth Advantage? He actually did the modeling on that. We designed a solar project that offsets about 70% of its usage. Wish that line had showed up. It was key to my point on this slide. Anyway, and then we were working on a metering scheme there as well. So the final solar meter savings of that property is $38,000, and This is a late change for him, the developer on this project. I'd caught him at this meeting like 2 years ago and we talked about it. And then next time I talked to him, he was already like on 95% plans and getting permits. And we stopped the train, went back to the utility, talked about different metering schemes and realized this $38,000 savings. It wasn't as budgeted before. So then he had to go to the investor. Guess what? The investor approved it like that because that's a significant plus up in the stability of the project, the cash flow of the project. And then the graph on the right, that doesn't show up in the back, but the project is going to cost $584,000. We're going to be able to pull in $155,000 in incentives from Oregon Department of Energy to defray that cost. So the subtotal is $429,000. And then if you use a 30% tax credit, the equity coming in would be $253,000. If it's a Cat 1 project, which is a low income community, it would be your leftover cost is $195,000. And if you're a Cat 4 low income benefit project and you get a 50% tax credit, now your cost out of pocket is $136,000 for a $584,000 system. And of course, I project that system will save the property $653,000 over 20 years. So that's a lot of numbers, but the bottom line is it's getting to where the out-of-pocket costs for solar, particularly for this industry, are greatly reduced, and it's definitely economically viable. You should be considering it. So some of those tax credits are old. There's some rules about how to apply for them that aren't even out yet, but we'll know more about that in the future. And right now, I base those numbers off an investor paying 90 cents for those for every dollar of tax credit, which is a little bit different than the housing price. And the reason I'm using 90 cents is because as soon as the Inflation Reduction Act came out, overnight, a market for what's called transferable credits that you just sell one-time cash deal to an investor. It doesn't go with the losses or any of that, just a pure tax credit. A whole market has been created for that just overnight, and the pricing settling out on 90 cents on the dollar. So that's what we're using for our assumptions. Last one here. So Sunset Senior, 14 unit project in Athena, Oregon. This is like maybe my fourth project that I ever did as a retrofit. And this is in Pacific Power territory. The savings on the solar for this project, so we took over the meters from the tenants, and now that we're all setting with the biggest solar project we could put on, it's about $10,000 a year is what it works out to. The other interesting thing, this is where I think we just really need to do, we don't have time to do this, but I do dive in the utility costs. This particular project, before we took over the utilities, was losing $11,000 a year just because they were using the Utility Housing Authority utility allowance. And once we actually calculated what the proper UA for that property should be, or the more exact UA, because certainly the housing authority is like you can use it as a last resort if you don't do your own calculations or pays effort to do it. We saved $11,000 just from that analysis. So there's a lot of, this is like your utility costs of these properties, like carrying water in a leaky basket. And you really got to think about where those little holes are. And so if I were to come to you at the beginning of this discussion and try to convince you to take over the utilities of your property, and you say, well, what about the tenant increased usage that's going to damage the budget? Well, there's a perfect example of it's not always the case. You might instantly save $11,000 on a 14-unit property just by not worrying about that so much and taking over the power bill. So I think that for me really drove home. There's a lot that we're missing in this environment, and it's not the usual stuff. It's not even necessarily heat pumps and solar. It's like all these other little things where the dollar bills were leaking out. And why is that important? It's not a profit thing for me. For me, it's about maintaining these properties well functioning with the things fixed, and the tenants want to live there, and finding a site manager that you can pay enough, that's a good one that you can pay enough to keep there. That's like it all works together. Next. And then last thing, just this is a new program in Oregon, but generally speaking, you can sign your property up for a community solar project and expect like a 5% discount. Your tenants could get a 20% discount as well. So that's something out there. If you haven't thought about that, there's a lot of projects in PG and Pacific Water Territory that are looking for low-income tenants. If you stay with tenant-paid utilities and you facilitate them signing up for community solar, they're going to receive the benefit of that, which is fine. It's just a different, a different path than what I've been talking about. And HUD and USDA recently released guidance that those savings that they would get from community solar are not considered income. So they wouldn't change the UA, wouldn't raise the rent. So it's a pure benefit for the tenants there. And then your property bill too, like your laundry meter or whatever, could get a 5% discount at least, maybe more. So I'd throw that out there as another option, and that's pretty easy. I think that's it. Oops. Maybe not. So kind of want to listen in the middle, but for those of you who were asleep for the last few minutes, wake up and here we go. Convert property utilities, assess your efficiency opportunities. It may not just be in consumption, it might be in something like the UA, like I just mentioned. Integrate your efficiencies into the early in the development. I have learned the hard way. I've had projects canceled because I wasn't in lockstep with the finance lead before the project even had an application put in to Oregon Housing. That's where it has to start, way back there. And that's where you can really leverage the benefits throughout the whole pro forma for a recapitalization. Right size the solar system, obviously, and then bring those tax credits, incentives, and cash flow into the discussion early when you're working on the financing problem. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions?
Actually, I have three, so.
Okay.
So in your earlier slide, you mentioned you installed about 5.6 megawatts of solar. Is that mostly rooftop, or are you doing something like constructor, shade structure?
It's about 2 megawatts of rooftop, and the rest of it's community solar.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have one big community solar project that's 3 megawatts. It's the biggest chunk of that, but that's in time that will be one of our smaller numbers as we're just mainly focusing on rooftop. Carports are super attractive, but they're outrageously expensive in Oregon. So I think they're close to 10 times more expensive than they would be in Arizona, because I just priced both of these. And the reason for that is carports in Oregon have to meet snow road, engineering code, winds code, and earthquake code all at the same time, which makes your building like a massive steel structure. Anyway, so yeah, it's interesting, but it doesn't pencil.
Geographical difference. I work in solar in California, so we don't have all of those extra. We just have sun.
Yeah.
Data around, you said in your master metering, you alluded to some behavioral changes like tenants and using the heat more and reducing some preventative maintenance costs, moisture and things of that nature. Do you have like the data that kind of like, you think you've done a master metering project to say that you reduce your maintenance costs?
I knew you were going to ask that question. I haven't gone and done an exhaustive study on what we did save on all those things. It's a daunting project to think about what even you'd want to capture to build that picture. Just on usage though, we some of our properties that we master metered, we actually installed sub meters, so we can actually see what the tenants were using afterwards. Also, if you're in PAC or Pacific Water, PAC is my short form for Pacific Water, or PG, you can download all that data directly without sub meters, so you can see it. But I would say that on senior properties, you're typically going to see maybe a 2 to 5% increase, and family properties might be more. And of course, it varies year by year. We have a family property enterprise that I calculated. The first year we did it, there was a 2% increase. And then last year, for some reason, it looks like maybe there was an 8% increase, but it's also seasonality in Eastern Oregon. I mean, that could have been explained by June just being horrible. So it's hard to tell for sure, but it's definitely going to go up. for sure.
And that's one of the nice things about using, if you can get your data into the EPA's portfolio manager, that's that free online utility tracking. They do normalize your data for you, so you can see any UI that's been adjusted.
I'm working towards that, just some of our utility providers don't provide an automatic data.
Right, I know, it's painful, I know.
Yes, it is.
I'll probably refer to your 2 megawatt rooftop solar. On those projects, have you done any post analysis of they're installing the solar that they perform according to the program in their energy?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that look like?
It's what I've seen is it all comes down to how tight your forecast was on the front side, but there's some pretty good tools out there for that now. When we first look at an assessment, we'll have a broad, kind of a larger, maybe not quite as accurate. The decimal place isn't quite as accurate on what it's going to produce, and then helps us nail the financing down. And then as we get a little closer to actual construction, we'll get it exact. And what I've seen is the models that are out there, like Helioscope and some of those others, at least on multifamily housing in Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon. The solar tends to underperform what you're supposed to get in the winter, and it overperforms in the summer. So I don't know what that is. I've just noticed that all of our projects look the same, a little bit under the curve, and then in the summer a little bit over. And all these models are built off NREL's data, 30 years rolling history of weather and irradiance patterns. It's close enough; it doesn't matter scheme, but yeah. Right. I mean, it's like if you have a March that just has 5 days more clouds, it's going to make a difference. But then the next year you might have one that's all sunny and it changes the other direction. So you're looking at 30-year average. Yeah.
We have an online question, and I'm sorry I forgot to repeat those 3 questions. So for our next questions, we'll make sure to repeat them so the online audience can hear. But what's the question?
Solar technology improves over time, becoming more efficient. Do you have to overhaul your roof panels every certain amount of years?
Okay, so there's a lot of strategy putting solar on, and that's one of the easy ones to throw out there. My recommendation, so that the answer to that question is maybe. So this is why I look at it. So a solar panel is performance warranted for 30 years. Inverters are 10. You can get them extended to 20. Bottom line, you're looking at an appliance that's going to be around for 30 years on your roof. So you really want to align it with a new roof, because that's about what a roof lasts too. And it probably lasts a little bit longer if it's got solar on it, because it's going to have less leaves, less hail damage, whatever. And then another question, I guarantee someone's asked me is, what about hail? Yes, if it's baseball size hail, we'll take a solar panel, but that's taking your roof out anyways. So the answer to that is insurance. And don't worry about it. It's like armor for your roof. Think of it that way. And it's way easier to replace a solar panel than it is a shingle. So yeah, I try to align those. Originally we had an internal rule of the roof had to be 10 years or newer, and we just kind of we put a new roof on and then solar so that they're aligned. Because we did have a project that we put the solar on, and then 5 years later, unexpectedly, we got financing out of nowhere for a rehab, and so the solar project was $180,000 to install, and it was another $100,000 to disinstall it and reinstall it with the new roof. So that was a mistake, a strategy mistake, but you win some, you lose some.
Any more online?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'm not sure who's there. I think you were. Sorry.
So are you convinced that this strategy of project paid utility works at all your properties, such that as you go into rehabs, you'll do this always on a new construction, and as you go into significant rehabs, like we're definitely going to redo it, we will be converting all the properties that way?
Don't forget to repeat it.
So the question is, are we convinced that this strategy is something that that works on all of our properties, and that we do it on all of our rehabs and really new construction, I guess. So yes, we're convinced to the point where we are doing solar on every. Now we can't always afford solar, but in the past, but as we move forward, that's not gonna be an issue. But we are doing planning for solar on every rehab project. We also are switching to private paid utilities, even if we know we're not going to put solar on, because it sets us up for that later down the road. And just working with our management company, they're convinced now that they save time and money by not having tenant paid utilities. So in that case, if you did that, you would have an increase in tenant usage if you take over the utility bills without the solar offset. But I still think that's okay, because really, if you really think about it, you're still paying for the tenant energy through UAs anyway. So it's just delayed by a year.
And is there anything you want to mention about timing, about when you would do a conversion to property pay?
Yeah. So this is another free tip we're getting from five years of painful learning experience that only those of you attending this conference will get. Think about when you to take over the utility bills. If you take over the utility bills in November, and you also put solar on, the solar is going to start cranking in June, May or June. Like June is probably the biggest production month in Oregon. So from November through June, you're going to have the lowest possible solar production, but you've also just taken over the tenant utility bills. So no one's going to feel sorry for the developer or the property manager, but that is a painful pill to swallow for the property. So what we do is we think about that. We can forecast when we're going to start earning enough energy to where it makes sense to swap. And there's times when we've swapped, the other part of it is when you take over the 10 utilities, and that can be offset from when the solar gets turned on. So just an example, we had a project last year where the solar was fully installed in April. We were not planning on the rent and utility takeover until August of that year, but I didn't want to miss the entire summer high production. So we actually took over the utility bills, cranked the solar, and the solar was 100% offset. And so we did take over the utility bills without getting that rent normalization, but it didn't matter because there was no utility bill that whole summer. So you got to figure it out. There's a strategy for every time, and it can burn you. We've actually started this work on actually planning for sort of a reserve account, almost like a tenant protection account would be, but you have it as a reserve account for your solar to help you offset those mismatches where you could really be eating a huge bill.
I have a question over here.
Yeah, sorry.
In making the switch, how have you dealt with certain utility companies with rate structures where you may have solar offsetting 100% in your banking residual, but they're still charging you a lot in their fee structure, such that it could be like $20 a unit per month.
Yeah.
Do you have strategies? Is that something where the net metering agreement needs to be looked at more closely? Is that a conversation with utility? And this is PGE here.
Okay. So let's try and summarize that question. How do we deal with a utility where there's a significant fee structure and the net metering may not allow you? I'm not sure I quite got that to get the benefit. Yeah.
Baking more into fixed costs as opposed
Yes.
to variable costs.
Okay.
Disincentivizing this whole act.
Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase your question because I know what you're getting at. So there's a trend, particularly in the co-ops, is where you're seeing it, where a co-op might think of itself as a distributor of energy, not a purveyor of it. So they're just raising the meter fees, and they're actually in some cases lowering the rates, and they're just basically giving you wholesale power, but they're jacking up the meter fees. And it's a reasonable solution for them. I get it, but it's really hard on affordable housing. And I think that's what you're talking about is like, well, if you did a solar project to offset this really expensive rate increase, what if it's not the rate that's going up, but it's something else that's going up at the utility and you've lost the value of that? Is that kind of
Very high fixed costs every month, even though we are banking more solar than the property use.
right?
So it just doesn't make sense.
So but you're not metering, right? So you're getting that back in the winter.
Yes, but even though there's zero consumption in a month, say the month of August, it's zero net consumption, right? Utility bill is about $20 a unit.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I got it. So in that case, $20 is high for a regulated utility in Oregon. We have a tool where we can do the cost benefit analysis of master metering. And if it works out to where it saves enough, we'll just wipe those meters out. And so you get rid of that $20 per unit bill. And that 10-year example I gave you, half the savings are just from wiping out the $33 meter fees. It's master metering is a big undertaking, so it probably needs to be done during preservation recapitalization project. I would probably, without knowing any facts about your situation, probably just leave it the way it is right now, but think about what you want to do the next time around. PG would be one of the utilities very itchy about master metering, but it is allowed, and you can call the Building Codes Division in Oregon and they will support it. So there's some other things to consider when you do something like that. If any upgrades are required, the utility will stick those to you, and sometimes those can be big. That's a consideration too. So it's, you know, it's not a panacea, what I'm saying, but you just got to think about it. Yes.
Some of those fees with PG are just to pay for their infrastructure and their distribution, right? So if they're not paying for usage charges, they still need to gain for service and, yeah, and that's PG or everything for the investment utilities as opposed to the Unitil, electric, or the Eastern Oregon. But I did have a question too. So I see you do a lot of retrofits. This is amazing that you have this energy component, like the business model is let's do energy efficiency and then add solar. Have you ever done a project where you replace the electric resistant hot water heaters with hot water heaters, knowing that they're 3 times more efficient?
Normally we don't, what we aim for is to put a heat pump water heater on the laundry. Just because it can be very difficult to get in there and retrofit with it. We were just talking about that. Because sometimes we've got little tiny water heaters under cabinets and there just isn't a space to put in a regular tank heat pump water heater. That we did do that though on one of our new developments. So we went through the whole process of modeling with some incentives from Energy Trust. And one of the things that came up was that hot water is such a significant portion of the heating load or the load on the property. So on one of our properties, we centralized our hot water with heat pumps, hot water for the whole property. So yes, sort of.
What might be a good situation for that retrofit? I know they have the hybrid ones that can be rotting space heat. Maybe it might have some condensation issues. Or there maybe is a vented solution where you have access to the exterior wall. And if you're doing these major capital improvements, where you're tearing apart the wall.
We're normally not tearing apart the wall. So if we were to have a water heater that was next to an exterior wall, that might be an option. But normally they're in the middle of the apartment. But yes, would love to.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one back there too, actually. She was first, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, man.
Thank you. Since you can't manage your tenants' habits, are there any features that you include in your build that help manage that, like demand response equipment or sensors on your fans and lights?
So
In the leases.
yeah, we in our this like a boilerplate thing in the lease, it says that, you know, excessive energy use can be a lease violation. But that's not necessarily, it just gives you like a backstop, but it's not really going to help you much. So we haven't gotten into this too much, but I know of some companies that are actually where the site manager might offer a prize for the lowest bill that month, like a cash prize or something like that. So that can have a powerful effect. You know, you said that you can't manage the tenants. Well, in some ways you can shape that behavior through things like that or through outreach or there's.
I was just going to say, this is a plug for Energy Trust. They have a program called Strategic Energy Management. Have anybody heard of that program? So they will work with you over a year. It's basically a behavior change type program where they want to work with property staff and residents just to teach them about different energy related topics each month. So it's definitely a great program, and there's some incentives so you can actually get a little bit of money coming back to the property. It's great. So that's an option too. So we are starting to look at that kind of thing, adding just a little bit of information for residents. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult audience to reach, and they've got other priorities. So, you know, try. One more question online?
Now, it was actually a follow to that, pairing resident services as educators along with maintenance staff and property managers to educate tenants on those new technologies as well can be really helpful. It's helped communities with a lot of their energy efficient properties.
Yeah.
Especially because, you know, with the seniors, they're coming into a property they never had some kind of heat pump before, and so it's educating them on these new systems. So resident services is always a benefit to tenant engagement.
That's true. And just recently, we built a preventative maintenance schedule, and we incorporated all sorts of energy related inspections and maintenance tasks, as well as built a Google Calendar to send reminders to staff about those. So we're looking at trying to get it from all sorts of different ways, but very good point.
So it just mirrors the sound like they're having more fun next door.
That's because they're done.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just curious regarding the financing, is are most of the rehab projects part of the recapitalization that you're mentioning, or what is the financing?
That's our bread and butter. I started with retrofits and tried to make each deal a bespoke thing where the solar financing was carrying the whole thing on its own. And it was too hard. It possible. It's just too hard. The question was what the financing was for one of these projects, and is it involved in the recapitalization. So we found that 9% and 4% deals are the vehicle. That's the best time to do it. In a 9% project, the solar will pay for itself completely. Just the way it works out with just even with the 30% solar tax credit and then regular 9% LIHTC. It's going to pay for itself. So it took us more than a minute to understand that, but now that we do, we don't worry so much about the solar project cost because it's self-paying, and there's still a limit on, you know, what you can spend on the scope of work, but solar is no longer the first place that's cut on a 9% deal. 4%, it's not quite as good, but you know, there's a lot of tools out there now, the different incentive programs to cover the gap. And also, I'm hopeful that there will be more loan products available. We have a side project to work on some federal loan funding for these types of projects to cover that gap, wherever someone that just needs a straight loan to help close the financing gap. I think I'm starting to see this in the industry that maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, you can go get your car loan and your solar loan from the same place. And it's just a commodity product that's out there. Yeah.
For people whose tax equity partners just don't have the appetite,
right?
Solar credit, do you have any advice on where they can handle it? Because I know you mentioned that you have another market that's sprung up.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So the question was, if your tax credit investor doesn't have the appetite for the solar, is there another way to get that equity? First of all, I'd say if they don't have the appetite, they're not thinking about it, because the solar credit is way more effective than the LIHTC credit for their return on their IRR. It's instantaneous first year credit. So I'm just surprised if that'd be the case. Now, sometimes I've had investors tell me it's such an insignificant number in the larger project that they don't want to mess with it, but it's a couple lines in the operating agreement can make it really easy. So I would say push back on that, but my next advice to you would be there's a couple of companies that have started up that are really driving the purchase of these transferable tax credits. So in this case, you know, with your investor, they would have gotten the losses that come with it, which make it super powerful, but the transfer loans are just transferring the credits out. So they are what they are. They'll pay 90 cents on the dollar for them. The one-time cash transaction, you just have to register your project before the end of the tax year or the financial year, the calendar year, I guess. And then I'm not 100% certain on this, but I believe that the tax credit investor would also have to register that they're linked to your project before they file their taxes the following year, which makes, if you think about it, like if you promise to purchase tax credits December 31st, and then you actually pay for them April 14th, and then file 2 days later, your return on investment is instantaneous. And so it's a good deal for them. So the market's just exploded. And the one company's name I can think of off the top of my head is called Crux Capital, CRUX. They are out there. They have an online intake portal. And I can't believe I'm pitching another company like this. I mean, I don't know them. I'll just say I've just seen some of the stuff they've been doing and what they're talking about, and they are offering to buy any project's tax credit, any size. So utility scale all the way down to 100 kilowatts. So yeah, that might be an easy way to bring a couple $100,000 in to pay for your project.
So we are a minute past 3, so I think we should wrap.
Okay.
Unless people want to stay and just chat with us, we'd be happy to talk to you. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.